you've heard, as was mentioned already, like no one should fast. It's terrible for women. And that's where we can maybe start talking about the nuance of where you're at in your cycle.
Welcome to the Advanced Women's Health Podcast, where we empower women with the latest insights and advice on holistic health. From cutting-edge medical research to practical wellness tips, our mission is to help you thrive at every stage of life. Join us as we explore topics ranging from hormonal balance and reproductive health to nutrition and mental well-being. Whether you're seeking solutions for a specific health concern or simply want to enhance your overall wellness, you're in the right place. Let's embark on this journey to better health together. This is the Advanced Women's Health Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode where I already have strong opinions. I am here with Dr. Ashley from our Vancouver clinic, and we are going to talk about all things fasting. And you should have heard me before we started recording. It is going to be a spicy one. I have thoughts. Ashley's got thoughts. We're going to dive in. But before we do that, I want to break down this, what seems like a very kind of esoteric, overused concept into different components and start to define things and how we define them internally. So when we talk about fasting, that could mean anything, right? My kids think they're fasting if they haven't eaten in an hour. Technically not defined in the research, but right, we're looking at overnight fasting, so 12 hours. We're looking at time restricted feeding or intermittent fasting, which is where you don't eat for 16 hours and you do eat in an 8-hour window. Then we have things like a 24-hour fast. And then beyond that, we have these longer fasts, which are generally broken into two categories. One being a water fast, and then one being what we look at as like a fed fast or the fasting mimicking diet, prolon, which is when you're eating in such a way that still mimics fasting due to the composition of the food. I am not going to include juice fasts in this because I don't think they provide anything beneficial. Come at me. People are going to be mad. That's totally fine. For the average person, it just keeps their insulin and glucose high for days on end, which is not beneficial. So when we talk about fasting today and when we're going through, we'll break it down into what types of fasts we're talking about because I think that's the easiest way to understand it. So now that we have that out of the way, we've got our definitions. Let's get into why people use fasting. So what are the different thought processes for why people are fasting?
Yeah, so I'd say like what I see mostly, and when people come to me already having done it, they're often doing it for weight loss, like is sort of primarily. And then when I'm talking to people for different reasons, whether we're talking about hormones, whether we're talking about chronic disease or inflammation or like even like mental health, then I might be suggesting some of these other types of fasts. So whether that is doing just that intermittent fasting, just making sure that they're not just eating all day long is kind of something that comes up a lot, and just giving your body just that nice break. And then sometimes when we're working on more of those chronic disease states is where we're getting into those longer fasts, whether I don't use water fasts as much, although there is a lot of research on water fasts. I'll lean more into that low calorie fasting mimicking diet, which allows the body to get into that cellular repair and cleanup state, which can really benefit these inflammatory conditions and these chronic immune conditions.
Yeah. So the fasting mimicking diet, for anyone who doesn't know, the research, it's been variations of it have been around forever, from the cabbage soup diet all the way forward, but it really became more scientifically researched when we look at the research from Walter Longo. And so he broke down what caloric intake and what exact breakdown of macronutrients you need in order to facilitate your body getting into first what we call ketosis, where you're burning fat as fuel, then a state of what we call deep ketosis, and then what Ashley was talking about is autophagy. And your body has to go march around and chew up cells that shouldn't be there, get rid of old proteins, old cells, and activate repair mechanisms. And so that research is highly specific. Like, it's a specific number of calories, which is low. It's anywhere between kind of 700 and 1100, and less than 16 grams of protein. Like, it's very, very, very highly specific. Only certain types of amino acids, because this is a conversation for another day. I think it's actually next week's podcast where we get into how different types of protein affect your muscle and growth factors. But in any situation, that is what we're trying to accomplish when we use the fasting mimicking diet. So I've been a huge advocate of Prolon and the fasting mimicking diet for a long time from a metabolic perspective. But personally, I started using it to help with endometriosis symptoms and got a lot of benefits with that as well. Cognitive energy, you can get benefits there. So it really is, yes, metabolically, we have a lot of research on the fasting mimicking diet, but we also know that their whole body inflammation can be improved in big ways.
Yeah, and I think that something you hear a lot about in fasting is that they throw around the terms like autophagy and mTOR, which you kind of hinted, I think, of, something like endometriosis is this pro-growth state. We have, we want to kind of have both of those things happen. We want to have that cellular repair, and we also need that growth, which helps to grow our muscles, helps to initiate hormone production. It can even, stimulate those insulin producing beta cells, right? Like, we can get that growth, which is important. But I think we live too much in that growth state, which is where we start to see pathology, and where fasting can be incredibly important at pulling that back and just switching into that autophagy. So I really like to use it for that. And just sort of, as a society, we just have constant calories, we have constant just the foods available to us, and it's a rewiring a little bit.
Well, it's really funny. I was talking to a patient the other day, and this is like a total aside, but I think it's helpful. And we were just talking about the kind of more disease that North Americans have. More is better. And she was like, I'm so embarrassed to say this, but when I do the fasting mimicking diet, because she does the kits, she's like, when I do it, I find that I shop excessively. And she's like, it's so messy psychologically, but it's like I feel restricted in one area, and so I feel like I need more in another area. In her situation, we use it for metabolic health because she uses it as a reset, because she finds if she doesn't do it at least once a quarter, she ends up back in snacking patterns. Her fasting window extends, like all these things start happening. And so we use it as an opportunity to just say, okay, listen, 3 meals a day, no snacking, give yourself at least 12 hours overnight, and get back into that structure. But she was just raising the awareness that I have an addiction to more. And I think so many people are in that same boat, right? Where we think more food, more booze, more money, more exercise, more whatever your more is going to give us a better outcome. And when you intermittent fast, when you do something like the fasting mimicking diet, it provides more than just a physical relief and like repair. It also challenges you psychologically in a really big way. And I think there's something really valuable about that. Again, a total aside to the conversation, but we're just a little bit crazy in our society today with how much consumption we feel is important. And I think that shows up on social media with people hating on fasting. Like, not even saying it's context dependent. No one should fast ever. It should never be done. No one should fast. I'm like just absolutely so triggered by this concept of not eating for 16 hours overnight. And now, obviously, we'll get into this, but it's not appropriate for everyone. But if you do find yourself in that pool where you're very triggered, first and foremost, don't judge yourself. But second, I think it's really important to look at, is that just a pattern in your life? in general, right, that you believe more and overconsumption and overuse is the key to success? Or do you have fluidity in those different areas? It's just, anyways, total aside, but I think it's useful.
No, it's good. And just to also just like kind of bring it back to the usefulness of fasting is it can be a bit of a dopamine reset. So we have like foods can, in especially these like hyper palatable foods, it can increase dopamine response, which is why we come back for more. And even so, I like the 48-hour mark or so, we can start to reset those dopamine pathways. And it can be really helpful, like exactly the reason that you're using it for your patient, but just we see like neurotransmitter wise, like we can get those resets. So I like it for that, as well as like microbiome changes that can happen with fasting. So we're kind of getting into some of the benefits that I like to
Yeah.
see, but we can see a lot of microbiome improvement, especially if we like over these little bit longer term ones. And our microbiome, again, kind of going with the cravings piece, is it can influence our cravings. So it's not just, yes, dopamine and like these hyperpalatable foods causing these like dopamine surges, but also the bugs that live in our gut that get fed by these hyperpalatable foods. It's like this cyclical thing, right? And so
Yeah.
we can have that actually sending a signal to our brain to cause us to crave more food. So just getting that break, it can actually start to reset the microbiome and those dopamine pathways so we can really work on those cravings. So that, yeah.
Let's break that down a little bit more because you used three words that some people are going to be like, yep, and some people are going to be like, what? So, what is a hyperpalatable food and what is a dopamine pathway and how is that essentially showing up in people's lives?
So a hyperpalatable food, I'd say, is a kind of an engineered food. So it's not something that we're going to find just growing in nature. That's a big way to distinguish it. It's something we're going to have to open a package to eat it. And so often those foods are a connection of a nice, beautiful connection of carbs and fats that tastes really good.
Liz, I bet you can't eat just one. It's literally a challenge, everyone. It's literally a challenge.
Exactly. And so those foods are kind of, we put in that, it's not just palatable, it tastes good. It's like, oh my, it's, MSG. I don't want to get into that argument, but it is designed to like allow more flavor into our taste buds to just increase that desire to eat more of that food.
Exactly. And I know it sounds, I talk to people and sometimes they're like, that sounds almost unbelievable. But when I was doing research, one of the clinical trials that I was helping out with was measuring how much cheese of different types of cheese people would eat ad lib, meaning if there was a huge plate of cheese, how much would be eaten based on different chemical compounds and flavorings that we put into the cheese. And so there is like a large investment into consumption. And as much as I think you and I sit here and hesitate because we're not paranoid, you know what I mean? But the reality is I think it's really important that people understand what they're working against. And if you think that you are just struggling with motivation and that you're a weak person and you can't just eat one because it's your problem, then you will consistently feel overwhelmed. Whereas if you realize that there is an entire marketing scheme, an entire science to overconsumption and how to engineer overconsumption, then you can recognize where that is playing into your life and how it's affecting you. And then from there, you can carry forward and say, okay, I'm not going to consume that food. I'm not going to have that in my house. I'm not going to be around that at vulnerable periods, etc. So I think it's important to just kind of understand that there is a science at play here. And that doesn't mean that we're like, oh my gosh, the world is coming for us, but it does mean that there is a reality that many people are fighting on a day-to-day basis. So, yeah.
I also find that a lot of people like the kind of all or nothing aspect of fasting because, as you're just saying, it's hard to navigate these triggers and these foods that are super tasty and help us, give us quick energy and make us feel good momentarily. And for a lot of people, in my experience, is saying just you can't eat from this time to this time, or we're doing this break periodically, not every day. They actually respond really well more to that, and that feels more sustainable. So that's also another way that I really work with a lot of my patients as we talk about like kind of what we're getting, like what are our big blocks, and then what can fit in around that. And then not like this is everything we're taking away. And so it can be a bit more, it just feels a little bit better to think like, okay, I can still have that food. I'm not allowed not to have it. No one's telling me I
Yeah.
can't have it, which doesn't feel good. It's just, we'll say, like in this window of time, or you can have it after you've eaten your protein and your fiber and your veggies. And if there's room,
When you're not hungry anymore, essentially.
exactly.
When you are so stuffed full that
Well,
you
and then you're
cannot
like,
eat
oh,
anymore.
I don't want to eat this anymore, but no
Yeah.
one's telling me I can't eat it. It's a
Well,
little trick that you're playing on your own mind, but it can work.
and
So,
that gets into, I want to get back to dopamine here, but this gets into the conversation around moderators versus abstainers and like different personality types. So I find it very helpful to explain this to patients, and I talk about it a lot, but I always thought I was an abstainer, that I just like couldn't have food in my life. And this was when I was dealing with weight loss resistance and like really struggling. So I was like, hard pass, absolutely not. I can't eat any of these things. And I realized over time, I'm actually a moderator like most people are. So, for example, if I have, like, I love really dark chocolate. If I have dark chocolate around my house, I will eat like not even a square, like a part of a square. That chocolate bar can sit there forever. And I honestly, as long as I know it's there and I can have it, I don't even think about it. As soon as someone says we are going completely chocolate free, all I can think about is that food. And it creates these unhealthy loops. And so for me, the only food that's off limit is gluten. I have celiac disease. But I find, because I feel like trash if I eat very insulin stimulating foods, that I do that. I eat my protein, my fiber, my veggies, all those types of things. And then I'm like, the world's my oyster. I could eat whatever I want to eat. I just don't want to. And I understand for some people, you're sitting there being like, oh, nice for her. She's a naturopath. I'm sure her life's different than mine. Cool. Probably it is. Let's be honest. But at the same time, I didn't get to this place through restriction. I got to this place through understanding nutrition properly, right? And I think that's what we want for so many of our patients. I still do fasting mimicking resets. I still do all those things because I feel really good when I do it, but I don't do it from a place of restriction. I do it because I'm like, oh my God, I feel so good. It's just 5 days. It's going to clean things up and we'll move forward. And so I think you're right. Like there's two different ways to think about fasting. It's from like a point of restriction or from a point of moderation. Like, let's just moderate your life and give you a break and then go back to generally healthy programming.
yeah. Yeah. I just think makes it a little bit easier.
Yeah. So let's explain dopamine before we move on to anything else. What is this dopamine circuit that we're speaking about?
So, dopamine is a neurotransmitter kind of responsible for motivation in a big way. For it's like we can just feel better. It helps with just like general mood and motivation. And so these pathways can get ingrained, like these habits that we have that can, like this makes this feel better. And we kind of go on these pathways. Some of them are good, right? We can find that if we do harder work, so if we like, exercise, or even these things like these hormetic stresses like cold plunging can cause, we have this like down, and we can cause it to go up naturally and kind of stay elevated through some of these like more positive changes. But we can have other things like there's certain drugs, there's certain foods, certain habits like social media scrolling or video games, these things like that can just like cause dopamine to go off, and those pathways get reinforced by these habits. And so by switching that up, it's like there's a bit of a hardship when you take it away, but if you take it away for long enough and then come back to it, we find those pathways aren't as well defined. And so with that, changes in eating habits, it can cause maybe those reinforced like snacking habits or types of food, things like that, that encourage these pathways and the dopamine release. We might not go down that really defined path as easily.
Exactly. And I always say when you combine motivation and reward at the same time, you're screwed. And you're right. Like it's where anything, hard exercise, hard work, hard scrolling, whatever you're doing on social media, you're getting these responses. And so it's not surprising that if you are really struggling with those dopamine pathways, that you would move from food to shopping, like I was talking about, to social, to these different things. But giving yourself that hard stop and kind of understanding how those things are playing in are really critical. Because I always say I never crave anything in my life like I crave protein on fasting mimicking diet, right? But it also gets you in touch with your body's craving protein because it needs protein in the long run. And you learn what nutrition and what nutrients are really fueling your body, which can be super helpful.
What I like to do, sort of knowing that, so knowing that we like to feel good and food is a big part of that. Even just like it, on fasting mimicking diet, you're like, you feeling hungry, you're like, that's nice to eat some food. But knowing that like dopamine can get reinforced other than food, kind of thinking about like, what are some other things that make me feel good? So encouraging you to have these other ways of getting that, having those like positive feelings can help sustain you through some of those, especially that first little hump of that metabolic switching, which we can talk about with fasting as well. But it can be there could be a little bit of a pain period there. So having some support.
Today's episode is brought to you by none other than Advanced Women's Health. If you are interested in diving in deeper to your health, if you are finally ready to feel like yourself, and you are finally over hearing everything's normal, everything's fine, and you want a deeper dive into your healthcare, then we are here to help you. We are currently helping patients in British Columbia and Ontario, Canada. But don't worry, if you're in another province, still reach out, get added to the wait list as we expand coast to coast. We cannot wait to work with you. Check out the show notes for more information on how to get started.
I love that. Well, let's talk about that because I think metabolic flexibility, the hormones involved with fasting, are directly related to the reasons people should or should not fast. So walk me through the physiology of fasting and like what is happening as we go through short-term fasts versus long-term fasts. So what's happening in those different environments?
Sure. So with fasting, kind of, I'd say in general, it takes the average person about 8 hours from our last meal to get into that fasted state. And so what do I mean by the fasted state? So after we eat a meal, we have if it involves protein or carbohydrates, we'll get a little bit of an increase in our blood glucose, and we'll also get a bit of an increase in our blood insulin. And what we want to see happen there is we want to see insulin help to take that glucose and put it away. So the glucose can go kind of one of three places, essentially, is we're going to put it into our muscles, we're going to put it into our fat, or we're going to put it into our liver. And because we don't want high glucose in the blood. That's diabetes. That has its own problems. So that takes a few hours after eating to kind of get those numbers to our nice steady baseline. And then it takes even a few more hours after that to get insulin down to a point where we can start then using our fat as fuel. So the way I kind of say it is I'm like, insulin's sort of a one-way. It's got a one-way ticket. So it takes our sugars and puts them away. But while it's high, it's like kind of will prevent us from using that fat as fuel and coming back out. So that's kind of the biggest step, I'd say, in fasting when we're talking about metabolic health and metabolic switching, is we want to see that insulin get back down. So that's why we talk about that so much, because when that's higher, we can't access that other fat.
One thing I just want to say there, what you're describing is in a healthy person.
Yeah.
I want to qualify that
Yeah.
because I'm about to go off when Ashley's done here about the difference between healthy and unhealthy. So if you are an insulin resistant person, it could take 16 hours, 24 hours to drop your insulin down to the point that you can liberate fat as fuel and start to use stored nutrients. So that's a really important distinction moving forward. So what you're describing is perfect. That is in a healthy person. So
Yeah.
anyways,
Good
foreshadowing.
distinction. 'Cause that's why we see, like a lot of people, they're like, I tried intermittent fasting, it doesn't do anything for me, or it maybe worked for a little bit and then it stopped working. And that's where we're like, okay, let's really see what's happening with these insulin dynamics, because you're totally right. It can sometimes take longer than they're giving themselves to get into that state. The other part of that thing that can take longer to liberate fat is also that liver sugar. So if we have in it stored in the form as glycogen, you've maybe heard that before. And so if we had a lot of stored glycogen, it can take even longer to get into that state. So that's where the people that have, say, tried intermittent fasting, they're so hungry, they felt weak, they're just like, I don't know what people are talking about, this is terrible. That's where there's likely a bit more metabolic dysfunction, and we need to employ some of those longer fasting techniques to start to improve that place. So from sort of that's where it's like, if we're in that relatively healthy state and we just want to make sure that we're not building up too much of that glycogen, we're not leading to maybe that stored fat place in the liver, that we can keep that maybe shorter intermittent fasting, so that like 12 to 16 hours, just to make sure we're keeping that system healthy and strong. So that's kind of in a healthy individual. The other thing that I do want to touch on, and maybe we can talk about it now or talk about it a little bit later, is what it looks like for women that are cycling with their hormones, and how we kind of tweak those numbers a bit depending on where you're at in your cycle. Because you've heard, as was mentioned already, like, no one should fast, it's terrible for women. And that's where we can maybe start talking about the nuance of where you're at in your cycle. And so that first part of your cycle, so that follicular phase where we're developing the follicle, that's where we have higher amounts of estrogen, and our body actually really likes to use ketones in that phase. It responds really well to that. And so we can tolerate a little bit longer of a fast in that time. So we could do closer to that 16-hour window if needed, or even something that I don't think mentioned at the beginning, but that's alternate day fasting, or doing something like throwing in a 24-hour fast in there if the intermittent fasting doesn't work for your schedule or whatever the reason is. But it's definitely a safer time to fast a little bit more and get into that fasted state. And then in that second half of the cycle, so going towards, it's called the luteal phase, that's where after we've ovulated, we start making progesterone, and that goes up a bit more. And progesterone actually likes a slightly more insulin resistant state, likes glucose to be a little bit higher, and that helps our body make more progesterone. And if we fast too severely or too restricted in that period of time, it can actually inhibit our hormones and inhibit progesterone production. So that's where you might hear like, it's really bad for your hormones. And so being a bit more aware and having that shorter fasting window in that time. So I love it. There's almost no one, I won't say, can benefit from a 12-hour overnight fast.
It's not even a fast.
No.
That's just hygiene. Like, if you brush your teeth, you can fast for 12 hours. Whenever people are like, oh, yeah, you know what? I fast 12 hours. No, I'm sorry. That's
just
not
a good
fasting.
idea.
That's just hygiene.
I eat vegetables. Like, that's a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
So even like in that time, it's perfectly safe. You're getting like, sometimes it's even those like nice complex carbs, like a sweet potato, things like that can be really helpful in that period.
And when we break it down, so in the face of dysfunction, right, when we're looking, the reality is if you have high levels of insulin and high levels of glucose at all times. You're already insulin resistant, which we have whole episodes on, so I won't go into a definition here too much, but where your body is requiring more insulin to actually move glucose where it needs to go. That is a stress on the body. And so people will say, I can't, like, for example, I hear this a lot in PCOS, and I know I've talked about it before, but people are like, oh, I can't fast. It's bad for my hormones. And I'm like, no, 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 no. What's bad for your hormones is how high your insulin is at all times. And so if we treat you for 3 to 6 months, your insulin drops down, then absolutely we may look and say you're more vulnerable at different parts of your cycle and customize that. But when you are that insulin resistant, your biggest obstacle and threat is how high your insulin and glucose are. It is not the fast.
Yeah.
And so this is where it needs to be personalized based on your labs and based on your presentation and what's going on, because we have women, especially who are insulin resistant and have PCOS, come in, they start doing 16/8s, they start doing fasting mimicking diet, and their period comes back and their hormones improve. And they're like, well, online it says I shouldn't be feeling better, but I feel great. And I'm like, okay, yes, that's because we've actually returned you to a healthy, normal baseline. So now you can have a normal cycle and these other things can occur.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah, like in PCOS particularly, there's a lot of research showing the benefits of fasting for hormones. So it does definitely, because we're in that more insulin resistant, hyperandrogen state, it can make a big difference. In particularly, I would say, like, if you're kind of comparing and teasing that out. So in lean women, so that's defined as 20% or lower body fat, they are more vulnerable to fasting.
honestly, I'm laughing because I'm like up to my eyeballs in the research on AMR, like advanced metabolic reset, and we're doing a lot of body composition analysis and all these types of things. And in today's day and age, like 20% body fat is extra lean. Like it is not like the typical healthy lean presentation. It is very, very lean people. And so I think it's helpful to break these things down and categorize it, because again, like for the average person, their healthy body mass, they're going to be somewhere between 20 and 25% body fat, right? For a cycling female. Men, you're very different. You guys can go down to like 10% body fat and you're fine. But that's why I giggled.
Yeah. And in those, but like for those women and just, everyone's, I find especially in the like biohacking longevity space, like everyone's like, what can I do to, improve? And you hear fasting a lot kind of in that space. And but in a cycling woman that has like quite low body fat, they're a lot more vulnerable to a fasting stress. So meaning you can have anovulatory cycles. So that means a cycle where you're not ovulating. You're more likely to get something that's called hypothalamic amenorrhea, which just means you're not getting a period because of some stress in your body. And so these are kind of the outcomes that everyone's saying, like look out for that. So I do want to, like I think it's helpful for people to know what to look out for and know kind of when this might work for them. So there is a number which I think is interesting, and it's the number of 30 calories per kilogram fat-free mass is like kind of like where we want to make sure we're still like getting the right amount of calories. So that can be the difference too. So you don't want to be fasting and calorie restricting and doing that long term. You still need to make sure you're getting the right amount of calories as well.
Well, and that's such a good point too. Like when we're talking about 16/8, when we're talking about 12-hour fast, whatever we're talking about, I always say to people, I'm like, you don't have to be hypocaloric in a 16/8. You can eat lots of food during that period of time, even if someone's doing, for example, 24-hour fasts. And this is where I don't think we'll get into the nuances of this here too much. But what I always say is keep in mind, if you were losing weight, that is technically caloric intake. You're just not putting it in your mouth. It's coming from your fat cells into your body. So if you are doing a 24-hour fast and you lose a pound, that's 3,500 calories. So technically you ate. You know what I mean? Like you just didn't eat food in your mouth, but you use that fuel. And so the issue comes when people are hypocaloric and fasting and not losing weight, which we see. Will be like people will come in and it doesn't matter what their body mass is, but they're coming in and they're like, oh yeah, I haven't lost any weight in 3 months. And we look and they're eating 1,200 calories a day or less and they're fasting and you're like, whoa, okay, this is not going to work in our favor versus a patient who's eating 1,600 calories a day, moderately active, but loses 2 pounds a week. They're getting enough caloric intake to keep those fuel systems in their body motivated to continue working, energy, thyroid, like all those types of things. So I always say that's an incredibly important distinction to me. And one that I ask patients all the time is like, okay, what are you doing? Cool. What are you losing weight? When was the last time you consistently lost weight? Because that's where I start to get nervous about how the stress response is coming involved, metabolic decompensation. They're using their muscle instead of their fat as fuel because we do not want to break down muscle in the process of losing weight, everyone. I don't know how many times I have to say that, but that's a bigger piece of the conversation.
And I think that's like, again, with fasting, they have shown it can elevate cortisol. And so that's another big piece of the calculus to keep in mind is that if cortisol is high, cortisol causes our body to have glucose spikes. So, that's going to be a thing and insulin's going to follow that. And that's going to be a thing that is going to inhibit the use of fat as fuel as well. So just making sure that, we don't want to be doing that really consistently. And then if there are things happening in your life that are, maybe going through a period where cortisol is just continually elevated, then having the conversation about maybe fasting, it's not the right time for that. Or we do have some, or just making sure that you're doing things to support that. So whether that's through like meditation, walks, whatever it is that you do, whether it's through some herbal support.
Babysitters, grandparents. No.
Yeah. Give her time to just calm the noise. So that's a huge factor. And I'm glad you touched on that because I think that's another thing that people talk about is like, is this going to cause my cortisol to go up? That's what I hear a lot in my like perimenopausal kind of menopausal world is just being like, everyone's concerned about cortisol, which fair enough. It can have a really big impact on our health, but kind of managing that is important.
And one of the things I always say to people is we need to look at our stress bucket. Okay. So in our stress bucket, I make jokes about, again, like kids, aging parents, things like that. There's also relationships, finances, how much personal growth you're getting, sleep, all these types of things go in your stress bucket. Okay. But then in addition to your lifestyle stress bucket, we have our physiological stress bucket. That is if your blood sugar is out of whack. That's the biggest way to cause a stress response. That is liver dysfunction. That is inflammation. Your body doesn't know if you're catching the flu, getting sepsis, or have low-grade inflammation. That is nutrient deficiencies. That is how much energy our body can reproducibly make. All of these things are stressors. So what I'll always say to someone is if you are dealing with a significant amount of lifestyle stressors, and you do not have a significant amount of physiological stressors that can be fixed by fasting. I'll give an example here for anyone who just got brain scrambled. But if that's the case, then you shouldn't fast, AKA you have a lot going on at work, life, things are chaotic. You just feel like you're running in 1,000 directions. You're not sleeping very well at night. And you have an iron deficiency. Chances are you're not going to feel substantially better if you're fasting, if you don't have an inflammatory issue, a blood sugar issue, etc. It just so happens that 75% of the population is insulin resistant to a certain degree. So that means for about 75% of people, you're dealing with the lifestyle stressors you have, but you're also dealing with blood sugar issues and inflammation and liver issues and gut issues. So in that situation, fasting actually reduces a stress for you. So yes, you're going to get quote unquote cortisol from abstaining from food, but you are going to have a lower stress response coming out of that fast than you went into it with. And these are the decisions we are helping people make clinically. We're looking and we're saying, okay, where are the stress buckets? Where are things sitting so that we can then help to articulate if this is going to be helpful and if it's not. And fundamentally, for most people, even if you try it and you don't feel good, we get that feedback cycle and we can close it really quickly. So there's been a few times where I've tried to do the fasting mimicking diet because I was like, oh, I've been really stressed out. I just want to reset, etc. And honestly, by day 2, 3, I feel awful. 9 times out of 10, when I do fasting mimicking, my sleep is 10/10, like so good. My deep sleep, my REM sleep is amazing. I feel phenomenal. My energy's up. I have more clarity. So if my sleep tanks, if I'm waking up between 3 and 5 in the morning stressed, if I do not feel good, if I'm anxious, if I get a headache, those are all signs to just not go forward. Just stop. It's not a big deal because it's causing more harm than it's helping with. And I'll say that to patients. I'm not saying like get hungry and feel a little bit weak and stop fasting. That's very different. But in the situation where you see all of your biometrics, because I track everything, right? Like on my little ring, when I see everything go downhill, I'm like, why am I doing this to myself? It doesn't make any sense. So then you stop. But that's also the piece of like checking in with your body, which I think we've also lost the art of.
Yeah. And I think just I like touching on that exactly and being like, just because fasting worked for you for this one time doesn't mean now that's the thing you need to be doing for the rest of your life. Like as we empty that bucket, as you're talking about, we kind of manage the inflammation, we manage the blood sugar, we manage the hormones, and we're like emptying that bucket. And then the fasting is going to be less and less helpful in terms of like really noticing that difference. And so I think we just keep hearing about how amazing it is. And so that more is more thing where it's like, well, if I just keep fasting, then that will be helpful. And it's like, and a reset here and there is always a good idea. But I think as we go through different seasons of life, to be aware that we're going to need different things. And so it can look different.
The human body fails to respond to constant stimuli. This is a fact that will never go away. I hear this constantly. Well, this used to work for me. Well, I'm sorry, honey, it doesn't anymore. Adaptation is what humans are meant to do, right? We are meant to adapt to our current circumstances. So it's not only that what used to work for you might not work now, it probably shouldn't. You probably should challenge yourself in a new way. And I think it's annoying. I'm just going to like acknowledge the fact that it's annoying, but it's important that we do look at that. And if you are in a situation where what you used to do isn't working anymore, there are probably 20 different things that you could do differently instead. And you may not like those things, but that doesn't mean that's not what you need to do for your overall health, right? I always say, like, I have switched exercise routines like so many times in my life, and every single time I do it, I hate it. Because I'm like, my muscles don't work this way. Take me back to reformer Pilates. But then you adapt. And you're like, oh, okay, now this type of muscle knows how to fire and I can do this really well. And then you go and do something different. So keeping consistent changes, I think, is also actually a very important piece of a health plan. It's not to just constantly go back to the same thing. And I have patients that come in all the time. They're like, I haven't been in 1, 2, 3, 5 years. And they're like, oh, should we just start back to where we started before? Like, I think let's just go back to my first plan. I felt really good on that. And I'm like, nope. That's not how this works, right? You can go back, you can try it, but it probably isn't going to work the way it did then because it was strategically placed based on all of the factors and all of the things going on in your life in that moment. And now your life is different. And so we need to rehash and look at it in a different way.
When we were talking at the beginning, we talked a little bit about what I think is a really another kind of key part of this fasting thing is like, does exercise break a fast? Like, is it important to not exercise on these fasts? Like, as you said, like if we're releasing 3,500 calories from
Yeah.
fat, like we should be able to move our bodies a little bit to go and help that a bit more. And like, I think that's kind of another interesting element
I'm
in this
smirking
conversation.
because this is where Ashley's like, go spicy.
Yeah.
Let it out.
Because
Let it
people,
out.
like there's just, I've heard opinions on all of it.
Yep.
And, you can do anything,
Yep.
break a fast. Yeah. And I just find that it does vary so much too. Like some people's cortisol goes through the charts when they
Yep.
work out, when they're fasted, or their
Yep.
sugar just goes super high, or, these things that they're not eating, but does
Yep.
that break their fast, which I think is just a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, so the exercise and fasting conversation's a really, really important one in general because there are a lot of people on social right now using research studies from lean athletic women and saying this proves that women should never work out fasted. And that is insanity. Because if you are not a lean, well-trained athletic woman, then you should not take that advice. Research 101 is make sure the population in the study matches the population you're treating. So I'm just going to like throw that out there. We can't use mice studies or monkey studies in humans and say it's a one-to-one. We can use it to inform our decision making, but we need to understand the population. So if you are a lean, very athletic female and you decide to exercise hard, not like go for a walk, but exercise hard on a fast, it may not be beneficial and it may lead to what Dr. Asha was mentioning before about hypothalamic amenorrhea. Your brain tells your ovaries we don't have enough nutrition and we don't have enough nutrients, so maybe don't make a baby. And then we don't ovulate. If you are not in that category, which is the majority of the people coming into my office, then we need to understand some very critical principles. When you are insulin resistant, AKA you have metabolic dysfunction, and you are fasting, meaning you do not have food in your mouth, you could still be in a fed state. So, what does that mean? You still have glucose, you still have free fatty acids, and you still have amino acids. So, branched chain amino acids, parts of proteins. You still have those circulating in your bloodstream. So if you have fat, protein, and carbohydrates in your bloodstream, you could probably do a freaking workout and use up those nutrients so that you can then proceed and actually get into a fasted state. And so that's like just from a nutrition standpoint, a fundamental. If I take your blood and you have nutrition in your bloodstream, you could go work out and just use up what is circulating in your bloodstream. If I take your blood and your glucose is already low, you don't have any fat liberated, then chances are you're not going to feel great if you go try and haul ass at the gym. The caveat to this is always like, if you are metabolically healthy and you feel really good when you exercise fasted, and you can switch fuel sources very easily, you could do whatever makes you feel good. I personally, if I eat a meal and go work out, I feel awful. The blood leaves my stomach and goes to my limbs, which is where I'm exercising. And I just do not, I feel heavy. I feel nauseous. I don't feel good. So I am not going to be the person who eats a super heavy meal and then works out. Now, might sometimes, depending on where I'm at in my cycle, I put some stuff in my water to give me more fuel and nutrients. Sure, no problem. But you need to understand what is happening to your body when you haven't eaten, because you might not be in a fasted state. And if you're not in a fasted state, we're not having this conversation. Like, I get so mad about it, guys. I get so mad about it. You can hear it in my voice. But you're not fasting.
Well, and I think you're really hard, like, saying the difference between it's like the difference of not eating versus a fasted state are not the same thing.
Exactly. Biochemically extremely different. Just because you do not have something in your mouth doesn't mean you're lacking nutrition. And that comes to if you're burning fat, we talked about that. That comes to what's circulating in your bloodstream. And so we have this idea, which has caused us many issues in the world, that if there's not something in your mouth, you're not fed. Again, going back to my beautiful children. I haven't eaten it forever. I'm starving. You're like, it was 30 minutes ago. Like, you're good. But we, as a general rule, think like that. And then when we get symptoms that we might believe are related to low blood sugar, most of us don't actually know that's what it is. When I was younger, and again, like I was very obese at the time, I had severe hypoglycemic moments. And I would take my blood sugar and it would not be low. That's because it was my brain perceiving the change in my blood sugar. It was inflammation. It was my blood pressure. God knows it was probably anxiety interacting there as well. But what was I told to do? I was told to eat, right? Oh, your blood sugar is going low. When you get those symptoms, eat. Even though my blood sugar, my finger prick never went lower than 4.5. I was not hypoglycemic. And so we do need to remember the difference between physiologically fasted and being in a fasted state and having food in our mouths. And I think the moment we can differentiate that, I'm not saying that to be crude, it's just a reality, but the moment we can differentiate those things, then you can truly understand what you need to do. Because if you have fuel in your bloodstream, there is absolutely no reason to go looking to burn fat, more fat. And we forget this all the time. We're like, why isn't my body burning fat as fuel? Like, there's a lot here. Why isn't it doing it? And you're like, okay, what is happening? Because if there's blood sugar in your bloodstream, because cortisol, stress hormone, interacted with our liver, then you don't need to go looking for your fat. Auto generation of fat, it sucks, but welcome to science, right? So if you have your muscles breaking down and there's amino acids in your system, those can become sugar. They like a fuel source. We do not need to go break down our fat. And so this is where I love blood work. It's such an important thing in my practice because I can actually see what is circulating in the bloodstream when someone hasn't eaten in 12 hours, 16 hours. And then none of this like social media recommendations matter because now I'm customizing it specific to the data with the person in front of me, right? And same with, again, like on these rings, on our continuous glucose monitors, etc. If you wake up in the morning and your blood sugar is at 6 or 7, chances are you could do a workout. Now, when you do a workout, your blood sugar can look like it goes up because more blood goes to those muscles, right? And so as much as the glucose monitor shouldn't be in a muscle, it's still, you get more blood flow there. It can look like your blood sugar goes up, but then it drops like as soon as that blood flow goes away. That's normal. So I don't want anyone on the CGM being like, I need to work out until my blood sugar drops. Like if you're lifting or doing something very blood flow inducing, you won't see that. Whereas if you go for a walk, for example, you might see that drop after your meal. So that's in a total and aside, but yeah, I'm like very passionate about this conversation ending and like everyone and their mother coming and telling me that I'm killing everyone because I'm telling them that fasting might be helpful.
Well, and I think that is, it really kind of helps to distinguish maybe the people that it's like, you could benefit from having a bit of amino acids prior to your workout, like thinking about the type of workout, why you're doing the workout, like which one it is. Like if you're going just for a walk or doing something that's a bit more fat burning, you can do that more easily in that fasted state. If you're going to be doing any like heavy lifting, if you're wanting to really do a muscle building workout, then you can benefit from having a little bit of that protein already circulating so that it can like boom, go straight to where you want that to go. So
yeah. And we do have the research that shows you've got like that 2-hour window, right? So people will say that as well. I have to stuff myself full of protein before I work out in order to be able to make muscle from my workout. And I'm like, no, no, no. You've got like a really strong 2-hour window. And then depending on the research, anywhere between 24 and 48 hours where our body does preferentially repair with those amino acids. So long as we have the right amount in all of them, but this is a conversation for another week.
One thing I wanted to touch on just quickly how in terms of fasting and like timing wise, because movement can really help to benefit and speed up getting to that fasting window. So we already talked about insulin. It helps to put sugar away, but we actually, if we have movement and we use our muscles following a meal, we can actually help to kind of speed that process up a little bit more. It bypasses the need for insulin by using a different door, essentially. And nothing crazy, just like a walk, 10 to 30 minutes, sort of depending. But I do like that. So if you can't fast for a long time, it can lengthen that window and get you where you need to go quicker.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think this is the thing, is the moral of this story is personalized medicine. And it's funny that so many people on the team keep joking that they want to just record a podcast with me just getting hit with social media trends. And like, but I feel like I would say the same thing again and again. The reality is you need to understand the study population. And if that reflects you, and you also then need to understand someone's data. And when you have that data, whether it's, again, a continuous glucose monitor, a finger prick, a smart ring or watch, or blood work, or a BIA, all of these things, body impedance analysis, sorry, all of these things come together to paint this picture of what is going to be most helpful for the person in front of us. And that may be that you are hypoglycemic when you wake up and maybe fasting is a bad idea. Or that might mean that you have so much fuel circulating after a 16-hour fast that it would actually make no sense for you to never fast, right? You need to do some kind of 24-hour alternate day, fasting, mimicking diet, etc. And again, there's a spectrum of what we employ. If I'm dealing with someone in front of me who doesn't feel great, energy is super low, they don't feel great when they're fasting, we're going to get access that in different ways, right? That might be through movement, that might be through other things. But fundamentally, these conversations really do need to be personalized. But we can make brushstrokes, but personalization is key.
Yeah. I feel like we could end like every podcast.
Exactly. So any takeaways that you really want people to leave with this fasting conversation before we wrap up today?
I'm thinking that if you've tried it and you didn't have a great experience, you found it wasn't working or it worked for a little while, that there could be the certain factors that you didn't try that inhibited it working for you. So sometimes it's just that it needs to be a little bit longer, as we keep talking about, to actually get to the state where you are in that fasted state. So I think that's probably the biggest one. And then just also being aware of what to look for as a cycling woman where it might not be the right choice for you. And so being aware of kind of both of those ends of the fasting spectrum, that just because you tried it one way doesn't mean that it just won't work for you. And there could be an alternate way that it could be just really beneficial. Another thing that I love about fasting is that it's free for the most part. Yeah. And so I just think of there's always so many things that you can take and buy and do. And it's just something that's accessible to almost everyone, not everyone, and it can make such a huge difference in your health. Yeah. And so I do like to have these like lifestyle things that just can change your life. So totally. Yeah, if it didn't work, it might still work for you.
Yeah, love it. And again, get that personalization. Work with someone who understands fuel sourcing and when it's available, understands how to test that, and understands how to personalize it. So Thank you, Dr. Ashley. This was amazing. I feel like I could talk about this subject forever, but we will wrap up for today. I hope you guys learned a lot. We can't wait to hear your comments and your feedback. And if you want to book with Dr. Ashley, you can check her out if you're in BC, virtually or at our Vancouver clinic. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you had as much fun as we did. And if you loved today's episode, share it with a friend and leave us a review. That is how we spread this message, and that is how we are going to revolutionize healthcare in Canada for women. Have a beautiful day and be well.